March 12, 1943. Essen, Germany. 11:47 p.m. Frau Margareta Hoffmann stood in her kitchen, irritated by the sound of aircraft engines overhead. Not bombers this time. Too high, too fast. Reconnaissance planes, probably. She returned to her evening tea, dismissing the drone as she had learned to dismiss so many wartime inconveniences. At 11:52 p.m., her 14-year-old son Ernst burst through the door, waving a paper that had fallen from the sky. "Mutti, look! The British are dropping papers again!" Margaret snatched the leaflet from his hand, glanced at it, and threw it immediately into the stove. Enemy propaganda. Ernst, how many times must I tell you? The Gestapo arrest people for keeping such trash. We are loyal Germans. We do not read enemy lies. There are two Chinese iPhones. The leaflet had claimed that Essen would be bombed within 72 hours, that the RAF was coming with a new bombing technique that would devastate the city, that residents should evacuate immediately. It provided specific details, the number of aircraft, the tonnage of bombs, even the weather conditions required for the raid. Margaret had laughed at the specificity. Such precision was obviously false. Just British psychological warfare trying to create panic. The Luftwaffe would protect them. The flak guns would shoot down the bombers. And even if some planes got through, the British couldn't possibly deliver the destruction these leaflets claimed. 48 hours later, on the night of March 14, 1943, the RAF executed Operation Crucible. 442 bombers attacked Essen using new Pathfinder target marking techniques. The raid destroyed 160 acres of the city center, killed 482 civilians, and left 50,000 homeless. Every detail from this leaflet, aircraft numbers, bomb tonnage, even the predicted weather, was accurate within 5%. Margaret Hoffmann survived in her cellar, but her house was gone. In the rubble, she found a charred fragment of the leaflet she had burned. The one that had told her exactly what was coming. The one she had dismissed as enemy lies. What Margaret didn't know, what 70 million German civilians would learn over the next 2 years, was that Allied leaflets weren't propaganda in the traditional sense. They were intelligence warfare. Psychological demolition through truth. The systematic destruction of German civilian morale by proving, drop by drop, raid by raid, that the Allies knew everything, could do anything, and were telling the truth while Nazi authorities told comfortable lies. Between 1942 and 1945, Allied aircraft dropped 6 billion leaflets on Germany and occupied Europe. German authorities ordered them destroyed unread, threatened imprisonment for possession, and mocked them as desperate enemy propaganda. But in the smoking ruins of bombed cities, in the collapsing Eastern Front, in the final desperate months of the Reich, German civilians learned an agonizing truth: the leaflets had been right all along. This is the story of how paper became a weapon, how truth destroyed morale more effectively than bombs, and how German mockery turned to terror when civilians realized the enemy knew more about Germany's situation than German authorities admitted. The Allied leaflet campaign began in earnest in 1942, after 3 years of experimentation and failure. Early psychological warfare efforts had been clumsy, crude propaganda that German civilians easily dismissed. But by 1942, the Allied Psychological Warfare Division had learned a revolutionary principle: truth is more demoralizing than lies. The operation was headquartered in London at the Political Warfare Executive, a joint British-American organization that employed journalists, psychologists, German refugees, and intelligence analysts. Their mission was simple in concept, revolutionary in execution: weaponize information. Unlike Nazi propaganda, which trafficked in mythology and emotional manipulation, Allied leaflets would traffic in verifiable facts. Specific military defeats with dates and unit numbers, accurate casualty figures, truthful accounts of strategic situations, and most devastatingly, advance warnings of bombing raids with details so precise they seemed impossible. The leaflet production infrastructure was staggering. By 1944, the operation included printing facilities in London, New York, and Algiers producing 80 million leaflets monthly. Translation teams of native German speakers ensuring perfect grammar and idiom, intelligence integration, providing real-time military information, an aircraft dedicated solely to leaflet drops, flying 6,000 sorties annually. The leaflets themselves were designed with psychological precision. printed on thin paper to maximize payload. One bomber could carry one. 6 million leaflets, sized to fit in a pocket, encouraging secret keeping rather than immediate disposal. Written in colloquial German, not formal propaganda language. Formatted to look like German newspapers, not obvious enemy propaganda, and most importantly, filled with verifiable information that civilians could check against their own experience. The Nazi response was immediate and panicked. On September 1st, 1939, even before the first Allied leaflet campaign began, the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda had issued Emergency Regulation No. 1. Any person who intentionally spreads or makes available news from foreign radio broadcasts or enemy leaflets can be punished with imprisonment or, in severe cases, death. By 1942, the regulations had intensified. Gestapo guidelines stated possession of enemy leaflets up to 6 months imprisonment, reading enemy leaflets allowed up to 3 years imprisonment, distributing enemy leaflets, death penalty, and failure to report someone possessing leaflets, 1 year imprisonment. The severity of the punishment revealed Nazi fear. Unlike bombs, which could be defended against, leaflets penetrated every defense. They fell in rural villages unreachable by bombers. They appeared in mailboxes, under doors, in factory laundries. They were small enough to hide, impossible to completely suppress, and most dangerous of all, they told the truth. Reich Minister Joseph Goebbels understood the threat immediately. In a confidential memorandum to regional propaganda offices in March 1942, he wrote, "The enemy leaflet campaign represents psychological warfare more sophisticated than we anticipated. Unlike our propaganda, which inspires through emotional appeal, enemy leaflets demoralize through factual accuracy. They are making German civilians question official information by providing verifiable alternatives. This must be countered through ridicule and harsh penalties, not logical argument. If citizens begin comparing enemy leaflets to reality, we lose control of the narrative." The mockery campaign was systematic and comprehensive. German newspapers published articles ridiculing Allied leaflets as desperate attempts by losing enemies, laughable military predictions from incompetent analysts, Jewish lies designed to spread panic, and paper waste from nations too cowardly to fight properly. Radio broadcasts featured comedic sketches of British officers writing ridiculous leaflets. Newsreels showed German citizens laughing as they threw leaflets into trash bins. Schools taught children to immediately surrender any leaflets to authorities, portraying such actions as patriotic duty. The message was clear and constant. Allied leaflets were lies. Believing them was treason. Laughing at them was patriotism. For 18 months, from mid-1942 through 1943, this narrative held. German military victories in Russia continued. German cities remained relatively undamaged. The war seemed distant from civilian life. Allied leaflets warning of coming disasters seemed like desperate propaganda from enemies who were losing. Then came 1943. And the leaflets started coming true. The Battle of Stalingrad marked the turning point not just militarily, but psychologically. As German civilians listened to radio announcements claiming tactical withdrawals and strategic repositioning, Allied leaflets told a different story, complete with names, dates, and unit designations. In January 1943, leaflets dropped across Germany contained specific information. The Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, is surrounded in Stalingrad. 22 divisions, approximately 250,000 men, are cut off without adequate supplies. Luftwaffe relief efforts have failed. The army will be destroyed by February 2nd. German authorities denounced these leaflets as obvious fabrications. The Wehrmacht communiques spoke of fierce fighting and heroic resistance, but never mentioned encirclement or impending destruction. Goebbels personally went on radio to mock the absurd British claims about Stalingrad. On February 2nd, 1943, the Sixth Army surrendered. The details match the leaflets exactly. Army designation, commander name, approximate casualty figures, even the surrender date within 24 hours. Frau Elisabeth Berger, a school teacher from Munich, kept a secret diary throughout the war. Her February 3rd entry captured the psychological impact. The leaflet that fell last month said Stalingrad would fall on February 2nd. Today the radio announced the heroic sacrifice of the 6th Army at Stalingrad, which fought to the last man. But everyone knows this means surrender. The British leaflet told the truth. Our radio lied. For the first time, I wonder what else they are lying about. I did not burn the next leaflet that came. This was the crack in the dam. Across Germany, civilians who had automatically destroyed Allied leaflets began secretly keeping them, comparing the predictions to subsequent events, and discovering a disturbing pattern. The leaflets were accurate, while official German sources were not. The RAF's bombing campaign provided the most devastating proof. Beginning in March 1943, Allied leaflets began appearing 48 to 72 hours before major raids, providing details that seemed impossible for an enemy to know. The pattern was consistent and terrifying. Leaflets would appear warning, specific city targeted, approximate date and time of raid, number of aircraft expected, weather conditions required, and sometimes even the aiming points for bombers. German authorities called this obvious bluffing. The Luftwaffe, they assured civilians, would shoot down any major bomber formation. And even if the predictions came true occasionally, it was mere coincidence. The British were simply claiming credit for raids they were always conducting. The March 1943 leaflets about Essen had been specific. Operation Crucible will target Essen with approximately 440 aircraft during the new moon period when cloud cover prevents fighter interception. The Krupp Works and City Center are primary targets. Pathfinder aircraft will mark targets with new colored flare techniques. Estimated bomb tonnage, 900 tons. Evacuate immediately. Everything happened exactly as described. The raid, the aircraft numbers, the tactics, even the colored target markers. All precisely as the leaflet had warned. Otto Schneider, a steelworker at the Krupp plant, had laughed at the leaflet when his neighbor showed it to him on March 11th. British fantasy, he'd said. They don't know our defenses. They can't navigate in darkness. This is psychological warfare. Make us afraid of shadows. On March 15th, standing in the rubble of his destroyed neighborhood, Otto reflected differently. They told us exactly what they would do, when they would do it, and how they would do it. Then they did it. We were the ones living in fantasy. They were telling truth. The leaflet campaign accelerated through 1943, and with each accurate prediction, German civilian psychology cracked further. By summer, a black market for Allied leaflets had emerged. People who had burned them in 1942 were secretly collecting them in 1943, treating them as more reliable than official German news. The Wehrmacht communiques became objects of dark humor. When official sources announced tactical withdrawals, as civilians consulted saved leaflets to find out what had actually happened. When radio broadcasts claimed minor damage from bombing raids, civilians checked leaflet predictions against actual destruction. Gestapo reports from late 1943 showed growing alarm at civilian attitudes. A September report from Cologne stated, "Defeatist statements are increasing. Citizens openly question official reports while citing enemy propaganda." One woman, arrested for distributing leaflets, stated, "At least the English tell us the truth about what's happening to us." This sentiment is dangerously common. The Christmas 1943 leaflet drop was psychologically masterful. Instead of military predictions, leaflets contained photographs, images of German prisoners of war in British and American camps, well-fed, clothed, and alive. Each photo included identifying information, name, rank, unit, hometown. Thousands did, and thousands received confirmation. Their sons were alive, contrary to Wehrmacht notifications that listed them as killed in action or missing presumed dead. The realization was psychologically devastating. Official German sources had lied about their children while enemy leaflets told the truth. Margaret Hoffmann, whose house had been destroyed in the Essen raid, had a son in the Wehrmacht. In October 1943, she received official notification that he was missing in action in North Africa, presumed dead. In January 1944, a leaflet fell containing his photograph at a POW camp in Louisiana, healthy and smiling. Her diary entry captured the transformation. "I burned the leaflet that warned about the bombing. My house burned. I ignored the leaflet that said my son was alive. I mourned unnecessarily. I will not ignore them again. The British tell truth. Our government tells lies. This is the most terrible knowledge." By 1944, Allied leaflets had achieved something unprecedented in psychological warfare: credibility. German civilians trusted enemy leaflets more than their own government. This trust allowed the Allies to weaponize information in devastating ways. The D-Day leaflets demonstrated the sophistication of Allied intelligence and the corresponding German denial. In late May 1944, leaflets dropped across northern France and western Germany warned, "The Allied invasion of France will occur in early June when weather and tides align. Multiple landing beaches will be secured simultaneously. German defense forces will be overwhelmed by the scale of the assault. Resistance is futile. Cooperation will save lives." German authorities declared this obvious disinformation. The Wehrmacht High Command assured civilians that the Atlantic Wall was impregnable, that any invasion would be thrown back into the sea, that the enemy lacked the capability for such operations. The leaflets had been accurate to within 72 hours. What German civilians didn't know, what the leaflets were revealing, was that Allied intelligence had penetrated every level of German military and civilian infrastructure. The Ultra program had broken German military codes. The network of resistance movements provided human intelligence. Aerial reconnaissance photographed every German defensive position. The Allies knew German capabilities better than many German commanders. The leaflets proved this knowledge in ways that destroyed German morale. They contained information that should have been impossible for enemies to possess. Specific Luftwaffe squadron numbers and their current locations. Names of Wehrmacht division commanders and their command positions. Production figures from German armaments factories. Casualty totals from specific battles, accurate within 10%, and details about German wonder weapons before they were publicly announced. The V1 and V2 rocket campaigns provided the most devastating example. Goebbels had announced these Vergeltungswaffen, or vengeance weapons, as war-winning superweapons that would force Britain to surrender. German propaganda built them into mythological status: invincible, unstoppable, revolutionary. Allied leaflets dropped in June 1944 told a different story. The V1 flying bomb has a range of 150 miles, travels at 400 miles per hour, carries 1,870 pounds of explosive, and is vulnerable to fighter interception and anti-aircraft fire. Approximately 40% are being shot down before reaching targets. The weapon is tactically ineffective and strategically meaningless. It cannot change the war's outcome. Every specification was accurate. Every tactical assessment proved correct. The percentage shot down matched reality. German civilians who had been told these weapons would win the war were reading enemy leaflets that explained, in technical detail, why they wouldn't. And the leaflets were correct. Dieter Müller, an engineer from Stuttgart, had worked peripherally on V-weapon guidance systems. He later recalled, "I knew the V1's capabilities and limitations. When the English leaflet listed exact specifications, I was shocked. This was classified information. They knew everything. Worse, their analysis of its military usefulness was more honest than anything our military told us. They understood our weapons better than we were allowed to. That's when I knew we'd lost." The leaflets about the Eastern Front were particularly demoralizing because they contradicted the Wehrmacht's heroic narratives with factual precision. While German radio spoke of elastic defense and strategic straightening of lines, Allied leaflets provided grid coordinates of retreating German positions, named the Soviet armies achieving breakthroughs, listed captured German equipment by type and quantity, and estimated German casualties with accuracy that was later verified. By autumn 1944, the pattern was undeniable. German forces were collapsing on all fronts. But German media presented a different reality. Talk of secret weapons, impending miracle victories, and eventual triumph. Allied leaflets presented mathematics, casualty ratios, production comparisons, territorial losses measured in square kilometers. The psychological impact was cumulative and devastating. Frau Anna Becker from Hamburg wrote in her diary, "Today a leaflet fell saying the Americans have crossed the German border near Aachen. The radio says our defenses are holding firm. Tomorrow I will know who told truth. I already know the answer. I've been checking for 2 years. The leaflets are always right. Always. This is more frightening than bombs, knowing the enemy understands everything while we understand nothing." The November 1944 leaflets marked a shift in tone. Earlier leaflets had warned of impending military actions. These new leaflets warned of Germany's impending total defeat. not as propaganda, but as mathematical inevitability backed by production statistics. One leaflet, dropped across the Ruhr industrial region, contained a detailed comparison. In 1944, the United States produced 96,000 aircraft, Germany produced 40,000, the United States produced 17,000 tanks, Germany produced 9,000. American oil production, 1.4 billion barrels annually. German synthetic fuel production, 30 million barrels annually. These numbers cannot be overcome by courage or ideology. They represent mathematical certainty of defeat. Continued resistance only increases casualties without changing outcomes. Every number was accurate within 5%. German civilians who worked in armaments factories knew this. They saw the production figures. They knew the supply shortages. They understood the material disparity. But official propaganda continued claiming imminent victory. The leaflets were telling truth that German authorities couldn't admit, and increasingly, German civilians believed the leaflets. 1945 brought the complete validation of everything Allied leaflets had predicted and the total collapse of German propaganda credibility. The leaflet campaign in the war's final months became less about prediction and more about documentation, providing German civilians with factual information about the catastrophe unfolding around them. The leaflets about concentration camps represented the most psychologically devastating truth German civilians had to confront. Allied forces had discovered Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, and Dachau in April 1945. Within days, leaflets containing photographs and testimony from these camps fell across Germany. German civilians' first instinct was to dismiss these as propaganda. Surely the images were fabricated, the testimonies were exaggerated, the camps were prisoner of war facilities being misrepresented. But by April 1945, German civilians had learned a painful lesson. Allied leaflets told truth. The leaflets contained specific details, locations of camps with coordinates, names of commandants and SS units, estimated death tolls with methodology explained, and most devastating, information on how to identify if loved ones had been sent to such camps. Thousands of Germans who had noticed neighbors disappearing, who had whispered about special treatment, who had chosen not to ask questions, suddenly confronted documentation of the system they had suspected but never confirmed. The leaflets weren't asking Germans to believe atrocities. They were documenting atrocities with the same factual precision that had accurately predicted 2 years of military operations. Frau Elisabeth Berger, the Munich schoolteacher, wrote in her diary, "The leaflets show photographs from Dachau. I have lived 12 kilometers from Dachau for years. We smelled the smoke sometimes. We told ourselves it was industrial. The leaflet names the commandant. I've seen this name in local papers. It provides statistics on deaths, numbers so large they seem impossible. But the leaflets predicted D-Day correctly. They predicted Stalingrad correctly. They have been correct about everything for 3 years. These photographs are also correct. This is the knowledge I cannot bear, that they told truth while we told ourselves lies." The final leaflets dropped in March and April 1945 as Allied forces approached from all directions, abandoned any pretense of psychological warfare. They became humanitarian warnings written with almost clinical precision. The city of Dresden will be bypassed by advancing Soviet forces but is not strategically significant. Remaining in Dresden presents no military necessity. Evacuation is recommended. German forces in the Ruhr pocket are surrounded. Approximately 325,000 troops have no possibility of relief or breakout. Continued resistance will result in casualties without affecting the war's outcome. Surrender is the only rational choice. Berlin will be the final major battle. Soviet forces will attack from the east with overwhelming superiority. The city cannot be held. Civilians should evacuate immediately. Those remaining face starvation, artillery bombardment, and house-to-house combat. Each prediction came true within days. The accuracy was no longer surprising. German civilians had stopped doubting Allied leaflets months earlier. What was different was the tone. These weren't psychological warfare aimed at breaking morale. They were truthful warnings from an enemy that no longer needed to break German morale because German morale was already broken. The contrast with German official pronouncements became darkly absurd. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine, German radio spoke of imminent counteroffensives. As Berlin was encircled, German newspapers claimed victory was near. As the Reich collapsed into isolated pockets, propaganda posters appeared promising miracle weapons that would reverse everything. German civilians by this point ignored official sources completely. They trusted Allied leaflets for factual information about the war, listened to illegal BBC broadcasts for news, and treated German official pronouncements as background noise from a government that had lost all credibility. Gestapo reports from March 1945 showed complete breakdown of propaganda effectiveness. Civilian morale cannot be restored through traditional measures. Population trusts enemy information over official sources. Open defeatism is universal. Arrests for possessing enemy propaganda have become counterproductive. Too many cases to process. And civilians no longer fear punishment for reading what they consider truthful information. The final leaflet campaign carried a message that summarized everything that had come before. Dropped in millions across Germany in April 1945, it contained no military predictions, no warnings, no propaganda. Just a statement and a question. For 3 years, we told you what would happen. We predicted military defeats. You were told we lied. Those defeats came. We predicted bombing campaigns. You were told we exaggerated. Those bombings came. We predicted Germany would lose. You were told we were desperate. Germany is losing. We have told you truth while your government told you lies. You know this now. You have known this for months. This is our final message. The war is ending. Your government led you into catastrophe through lies. We have documented that catastrophe through truth. Remember which voice told you what was real? Margaret Hoffman, who had burned the first leaflet warning about Essen's bombing in 1943, kept this final leaflet in her diary. She wrote, "They are correct. About everything. I burned the truth in 1943 and believed the lies. My house burned. My son almost died. My country is destroyed, because I chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. This leaflet I will keep, as reminder, as confession, as evidence that we were warned, and we chose not to listen." The Allied leaflet campaign succeeded because it violated every principle of traditional propaganda. Instead of emotional manipulation, it provided factual information. Instead of exaggeration, it offered measured accuracy. Instead of demonizing the enemy, it documented reality. The psychological impact on German civilians was more devastating than any bombing campaign because it destroyed the foundation of their worldview. Bombs destroyed buildings. Leaflets destroyed the belief that their government was truthful, competent, and trustworthy. Post-war psychological assessments of German civilians conducted by Allied military government revealed the profound impact. Dr. Hans Speyer, chief of the Foreign Morale Analysis Division, wrote in his 1950 report, "The leaflet campaign achieved something unprecedented in modern warfare. It convinced enemy civilians that their opponents were more truthful than their own government. This wasn't accomplished through propaganda skill, but through consistent accuracy. German civilians learned through repeated validation that Allied leaflets predicted reality, while German official sources predicted fantasy. This destroyed German civilian morale more effectively than military defeat because it meant Germans watched their nation collapse while understanding their government was lying about the collapse. The statistics compiled from post-war surveys were remarkable. 78% of German civilians admitted to reading at least one Allied leaflet despite prohibitions. 64% admitted to keeping leaflets rather than destroying them. 51% stated they trusted Allied leaflets more than German official sources by 1944. 43% admitted Allied leaflets influenced their understanding of the war's progress. 89% stated that leaflet predictions proved accurate based on their personal observation. These weren't people who had been convinced by propaganda. These were people who had been convinced by reality documented in advance. The German soldiers' experience paralleled civilians. Wehrmacht soldiers on all fronts received Allied leaflets specifically designed for military audiences. These leaflets contained information that should have been impossible for enemies to know. Their unit designations, their commanders' names, their current tactical situation, their supply status, and predictions of impending Allied operations against them. Unteroffizier Friedrich Weber, captured in France in August 1944, told his interrogators, We received a leaflet 3 days before the American breakout at St. Lo. It told us exactly which units would attack, where they would attack, and that our defenses would collapse within 48 hours. Our officers told us it was disinformation meant to create panic. Everything happened exactly as the leaflet said. After that, when leaflets arrived telling us to surrender because continued resistance was pointless, many of us believed them. Not because we were cowards, but because they had proven they told truth. The most psychologically sophisticated aspect of the leaflet campaign was how it forced Germans to choose between two contradictory sources of information, one consistently accurate, one consistently false, and documented their choice. Every time a German civilian chose to believe official propaganda over Allied leaflets, reality subsequently proved them wrong. This created a psychological pattern of self-correction where Germans learned to trust the enemy over their own government. This was unprecedented in warfare. Enemies typically can't establish credibility with opponent populations because governments control information and can suppress contradictory sources. But leaflets were unsuppressible. Millions fell from the sky monthly, impossible to completely intercept, small enough to hide, and addressing questions German civilians were already asking. The transformation of Frau Hoffmann is representative. She had been a loyal Nazi Party supporter, had sent her son to Wehrmacht service with pride, had believed in eventual German victory, and had trusted official sources completely. The leaflets didn't convert her through persuasion. They converted her through documented accuracy. 3 years of predictions that came true while official promises never materialized. Her diary from April 1945 shows complete psychological reversal. I was wrong about everything. The leaflets were right about everything. This is not propaganda. Propaganda is what Goebbels gave us. This is documentation. They documented our defeat while we pretended victory. They documented our crimes while we denied knowledge. They documented reality while we lived in fantasy. I hate them for being right, but I hate us more for being wrong. This psychological state, anger at the truth teller combined with deeper anger at those who lied, characterized German civilian morale in 1945. The leaflets had accomplished something bombs couldn't. They had destroyed faith in German authority by proving that authority was consistently, demonstrably, systematically dishonest. The Allied leaflet campaign dropped 6 billion pieces of paper on Germany and occupied Europe between 1942 and 1945. The operation cost approximately $25 million. Less than the cost of a single major bombing raid. Yet its psychological impact exceeded any conventional military operation. Post-war analysis by military historians concluded that the leaflet campaign shortened the war by undermining German civilian support for continued resistance. When German civilians no longer believed their government's promises of eventual victory, continued sacrifice became psychologically impossible to justify. The numbers told the story. 6 billion leaflets dropped, 6,000 dedicated leaflet sorties flown, 80 million leaflets produced monthly at peak, 42 different languages used across occupied Europe, 200+ different leaflet designs for various audiences and purposes. Estimated 80% of German population saw at least one leaflet. Estimated 60% read at least one leaflet completely. The cost effectiveness was staggering. For the price of 200 tons of bombs, the Allies distributed information that demoralized an entire nation. For the cost of one bomber lost, millions of leaflets reached civilians in areas no bomber could safely reach. But the real legacy was psychological and historical. The leaflet campaign proved that in modern warfare between industrial nations, truth is a weapon and credibility is a strategic asset. The Allies won the information war not through superior propaganda, but through superior honesty. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stated in his 1948 memoir, "The psychological warfare campaign, particularly the leaflet operations, contributed significantly to German collapse. When enemy civilians trust your information over their own governments, you have achieved a victory that cannot be reversed by military operations." The Germans lost faith in their leadership through the simple expedient of our telling them truth while their government told them lies. German authorities never recovered from the credibility crisis. In the war's final months, even Goebbels recognized the problem. In a March 1945 meeting recorded by his secretary, he stated, "We have lost the propaganda war. The enemy established credibility through accuracy. while we established incredibility through exaggeration. German civilians believed the enemy because the enemy proved truthful. This is the most devastating defeat. We cannot convince our own people. The individual Germans who had learned to trust Allied leaflets carried that knowledge into post-war life. Many became supporters of democratic reform specifically because they had learned that democratic societies told truth while authoritarian societies told lies. The leaflets hadn't just undermined Nazi authority, they had undermined the entire concept that authoritarian governments deserve trust. Hans Müller, the Obergefreiter who had documented the Ardennes Cold, wrote in 1947, "The leaflets taught us that free societies can afford honesty because they don't fear their citizens knowing reality. Dictatorships must lie because their citizens would rebel if they knew truth." I learned this at 24 years old, standing in snow raiding an Allied leaflet that told me more truth about Germany's situation than my own generals. This lesson shaped my entire post-war political philosophy. The leaflet campaign influenced Cold War psychological operations. Both American and Soviet military studied the operation, learning that credibility is built through consistent accuracy, not through emotional appeals. The Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and other Cold War information operations explicitly based their strategies on lessons from World War II leaflet campaigns. Tell truth, verify information. Build credibility through accuracy. Modern information warfare still references the campaign as the gold standard of psychological operations. Military information operations doctrine teaches that the Allied leaflet campaign succeeded because it prioritized accuracy over persuasion, documented reality over shaping narratives, and built long-term credibility over short-term psychological impact. On March 12, 1943, Frau Margareta Hoffmann had burned an Allied leaflet warning that Essen would be bombed. She called it enemy lies. 48 hours later, exactly as the leaflet predicted, 442 RAF bombers destroyed her neighborhood. For 2 years afterward, she collected every leaflet that fell. She compared them to reality. She documented in her diary how every major prediction came true, how every casualty estimate proved accurate, and how every military assessment matched subsequent events. In April 1945, as American forces occupied her destroyed city, she handed her collection to an American intelligence officer, 67 leaflets, carefully preserved, annotated with notes comparing predictions to outcomes. Every single prediction had been accurate. "I burned the truth," she told the officer. "Then I watched the truth happen anyway. For 2 years, you told us what would occur, and we called you liars. For 2 years, our government told us we were winning, and we called them truthful. We chose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. This is why we lost, not because your armies were stronger, though they were, because your truth was stronger than our lies." The Allied leaflet campaign demonstrated a fundamental principle of information warfare. Consistent accuracy is more powerful than persuasive deception. German civilians didn't stop believing Nazi propaganda because Allied leaflets were convincing. They stopped believing Nazi propaganda because reality repeatedly proved it false, while proving Allied leaflets true. By 1945, German civilians treated Allied leaflets as more reliable than their own government. This wasn't a propaganda victory, it was a credibility collapse. The Reich lost the information war because it couldn't compete with enemies who simply told the truth. The final assessment belongs to Dr. Joseph Goebbels, found in his diary entry from April 15, 1945, days before his suicide. The enemy's psychological warfare succeeded through a method we never mastered: truth. They told German civilians what was actually happening. We told German civilians what we wished was happening. Reality sided with the enemy. This is the ultimate propaganda defeat, when your own citizens trust your enemy's information over yours. 6 billion leaflets, 6 billion pieces of paper telling Germans what was really happening to them. 6 billion truth weapons that destroyed morale more effectively than 6 billion tons of bombs could have. The German civilians who mocked Allied leaflets learned an agonizing lesson. The leaflets weren't propaganda, they were documentation. Documentation of military defeats, while German radio claimed victories. Documentation of cities that would be bombed before the bombers arrived. Documentation of Germany's collapse while German newspapers printed fantasies of imminent triumph. The mockery stopped when reality arrived, and reality had arrived exactly as the leaflets predicted. Raid after raid, defeat after defeat, truth after truth. In the rubble of the thousand-year Reich, surrounded by evidence that everything Allied leaflets had warned about had come true, German civilians confronted the most demoralizing realization of all. They had been told the truth by their enemies and lied to by their leaders. And they had chosen to believe the lies. That choice, replicated by millions across Germany, hadn't changed the war's outcome. The industrial mathematics guaranteed Allied victory regardless of German civilian morale. But it had made the experience more psychologically devastating because Germans watched their nation collapse while understanding their government had lied about the collapse at every stage. The Allied leaflets had told the truth. That was their weapon. Truth delivered from the sky in 6 billion pieces. Truth that Germans had mocked until reality proved the mockery was denial. The leaflets had been right about everything. And that truth destroyed German morale more thoroughly than any weapon in the Allied arsenal.